Hello there. Yes, I'm Marc Hildenbrand. I'm sorry you had to deal with such a long name, as I said before. I'm a staff engineer at Canva, as you already heard. Canva is a design product. So we have a crazy big goal to empower the whole world to design, from collaborative whiteboards to videos to this humble presentation that I made on Canva. I hope you like it. I'm going to talk a bit about, this talk is for those that are trying to get to Kubernetes. I'm going to set a cultural challenge for myself, hopefully not offending everyone in this room, to use bits of ukiyo-e art to illustrate different aspects of our journey. So what I'm going to talk about today is where my story intersects with Canva's. About 2 years ago, we were asked to drive the migration of 200 some odd user-facing services made up of almost 400 different types of workloads from the forests to the top of Mount Fuji. Why did we want to move to Kubernetes? You're here. You know what's good about Kubernetes. I don't have to tell you people. I will point out, as an end user company, these are some of the things that we saw as being really useful for us and why we wanted to undertake such a migration in the first place. We'll come back to Carpenter in a second. Great project. Also, being able to access open source ecosystems like the one that the CNCF kind of nurtures, those were two very key reasons why we moved. But there were challenges along the way. This is what our service teams were like, trying to get to the Mount Fuji of Kubernetes. The trouble with, if I can just go next, there we go. The problems we had is that we had teams that, while we were excited about Kubernetes and platform engineering land, the service teams were less excited, shall we say. They were not motivated to move because we didn't have much to offer them at first. We also were told that we mustn't disrupt their operations because we care about our end users and we don't want them to have service outages. There we go. This burn down chart is really where our story begins. So we started our migration and we told our upper management, if you will, that, oh, we could probably do this in a year. And that burn down chart, as you can see, was not trending in the right direction even remotely when we looked at our migration based on services. So they said, can you do it in 6 months instead? Because now we're really worried a year feels like too long to wait to find out. Sorry, just having trouble advancing the slides. There we go. To help you understand how did we get on top of this challenge, a service at Canva tends to follow a pattern that looks something like this. On the right, you see what we call an RPC, remote procedure call, is sort of what initiates it. That's the synchronous side of a service. On the left, you see the asynchronous side of the service. So a synchronous service might take in data, put it in a queue, and then the worker, as it's called, would do the batch processing. So while we were getting nowhere fast, trying to migrate service by service, when we looked at the services themselves, we noticed something that could help us. The services all have slightly different configuration. And that was our first kind of insight about this, is that while the services we tried to think about them as they were all the same, the services actually had configuration which gave us insights about what capabilities they required of the platform underneath them. That's where our first kind of lesson comes in, which I artistically see as budding capabilities in our nascent Kubernetes practice, that some, but not all, configuration implies a capability that a workload requires of the platform. So we thought, well, what if we do an analysis of all these different services that we're trying to migrate? So this was a couple years ago when we started this, so we were using Jupyter Notebooks. AI has gone well beyond that. But it was easy for us to basically catalog all the capabilities of our services and say which services needed which capabilities, which for us might have been GPU support, canary rollout support, ephemeral volumes. Those were kind of specific to us, and you see that down the left side of that contemporaneous screenshot of when we were doing the migration. Just to make it clear, the order of implementation isn't just add the capability that the most services use. It's a bit of a wicked problem because different services require different combinations of capabilities. So that's where this notebook was helpful for us to slice and dice the data and sort of pick lower tier services to migrate so that we could get some confidence. And once you open up a capability, you open up the possibility to migrate more services. And we'll come back to that before we're done. Now that was the first place, so if any of you have lost confidence with upper management, this was a way that we could switch the narrative a bit. Instead of worrying about that burn down chart, which we still had to migrate the services, we could at first worry about what capabilities we were delivering and how quickly we were delivering those capabilities. Which leads to the second lesson, which is about for every capability that we add, we want to migrate a real service to production with that capability. So we called that proving out a capability. So that would be how we knew we actually had that capability. What you see in this picture that I'm trying to represent is our gently helping a service team through the snow and through the vicissitudes of moving from our ECS platform to our brand new Kubernetes platform. This is something we called white glove migrations, implying high levels of service. Next slide. This is my 5-year-old's diagram of what that looked like, but you can kind of see in the blue, these are different services that needed different capabilities in the purple, and as you put them together, that is our white glove migration of all the different services. So we could work with those teams to kind of prove those things out. Just as a fun fact, the very first service that we migrated to production to our new ECS platform was the takeout service, which is a service that allows people to move off of Canva, which was we thought it was wonderfully ironic. Maybe you do too. So next slide. There were some villains in our migration. So I don't have a ton of time to get into all this, but some of our villains was that scaling in ECS was very imperative and very based on CloudWatch metrics and multi-metrics. This can get very complex using HBA, even if you pull in something like Kata, which is, please do, Kata is a wonderful project to help with that. Our other villain was the thing that we wanted all along, which was Carpenter. So Carpenter is still an excellent project. It is very good at bin packing. So we had workloads that were constantly being evicted because there was a better, more optimal node out there. And that was a problem because our workloads were Spring-based at the time and took a while to start up. So you will become friends with pod disruption budgets, topology spread constraints, and custom readiness gates to make sure you keep a good enough level of availability. Which leads to our third lesson, which is have a way back. And that's where the title of the talk kind of comes in. Sometimes services had to go back to ECS. So to give some confidence that you could migrate between the platforms, the key for us was that both platforms were in operation for the service at the same time. And the way we accomplished that is we had common resources, which we'll talk about in just a second, but then we also had the ability to reroute traffic based on incoming requests. If you remember our RPC, we were able to reroute traffic using just simple DNS weighting. So we used CNAME chasing, and we added a separate layer of DNS, which meant that we could write a script to imperatively decide how we wanted to move traffic. This allowed us not just to slowly shift traffic to the new platform, but also to quickly, in a case of emergency, run back to the other platform. Again, both the services were using common resources like queues. Those were the same for both platforms. So like persistent resources tended to be outside of our Kubernetes instance. For workers, it was a bit more complicated. I don't have time to get into it, except to say Kata helped us a lot there. We were able to effectively get 50% or 100% of workers based on shutting workers off in one platform or the other. The other thing this highlights is whenever we deployed a service, we deployed the service to both platforms so that we had the ability to migrate back and forth. So the same binary to both platforms, a slightly different configuration. Now, finally, we had to come back to our management very benevolent management, but they wanted to see these services migrated. And once we had the capabilities and the confidence and the safety nets, then we started to migrate services en masse. So we were able to take a group of services that were the same and move them over in quick time. What you see in the yellow is this notion of evicted services. So teams have things going on. Sometimes it's not a great time for them to migrate. They had the ability to opt out, or something would go wrong. They just get kicked out. They go back to the platform they enjoyed, and we come back to them later. We got very fancy with this. This is an example of how we did that migration, just to show there's the active migration, there's the dark release, where we're deploying to both platforms, just making sure they deployed, then we slowly shift traffic. If something fails, we go running back over the bridge, back to the safety of ECS, which was our base platform. And then just to be clear, there's 2 weeks of warranty. There are sometimes services don't show problems till a couple weeks later, so we made sure we continued to dark deploy, even at extra cost, to ensure that we could roll back if something happened that we couldn't fix. But after 2 weeks, then you're in the new platform. We have to only forward fixes were available. I'll have to skip through this, but it became a science at the end. Once we had confidence in the platform, we could group services together, and we had an ability to send out all kinds of communications that made it look like we knew what we were doing all along when we were migrating this. So really quickly, lessons learned. Start with capabilities, not services. If you find yourself in my situation, that's my advice to you. Gain confidence by proving out those services with real production services, leveraging capabilities. Things will go wrong. Have a rollback strategy. And finally, the last postcard. When you're ready, migrate en masse, and the remaining services will use the proven capabilities. Thank you very much for having me.